Mabel Jenkins had lived in the same house for 43 years, long enough to see oak saplings grow into towering trees, long enough to watch neighbors come and go like seasons. She remembered the day she and her husband moved in. The walls bare, the floor scuffed, the kitchen sink leaking, but it was theirs. They had worked double shifts at the post office and the auto plant just to scrape together the down payment. He used to say, "This house ain't fancy, but it's honest." He'd been gone 12 years now. But she still talked to him sometimes, especially on rainy evenings when the pipes groaned like old bones. At 73, Mabel moved slower. Her knees ached in the damp, and her hands sometimes trembled when she poured tea. She lived alone now, but she wasn't lonely. The neighborhood knew her. Kids called her Miss Mabel when they passed on bikes. The mail carrier always stopped to ask how she was doing. Even the stray cat that slept on her back porch had a name. Buttonzan showed up every evening like clockwork for a saucer of milk. Money had always been tight, but manageable. Her Social Security check came like clockwork on the third Wednesday of every month. She budgeted carefully: utilities, groceries, medicine, a small donation to her church. She never bought new clothes unless hers wore through. She patched her curtains, reused coffee grounds for her garden, kept her thermostat set low in winter just enough to keep the pipes from freezing. But lately, bills had started to feel heavier. Property taxes had jumped 2 years in a row. Then the roof leaked during a summer storm, and the repair cost nearly $1,200, money she didn't have. She'd taken out a small loan from a local credit union, promising herself she'd pay it off before winter. She was trying. Every day she was trying. What she didn't know was that the block she lived on had caught the attention of investors. New coffee shops with $7 lattes had opened 3 blocks over. Luxury condos were going up where the old laundromat used to be. People in crisp blazers walked around with clipboards snapping photos of houses like hers, modest brick, built in the 1950s with small yards and wide front porches. To them, these weren't homes. They were undervalued assets. One Tuesday morning, just after breakfast, there was a knock at the door. Mabel shuffled to the front in her slippers, wiping her hands on her apron. She wasn't expecting anyone. Through the peephole, she saw a man in a navy blue polo shirt with a logo on the chest she couldn't read. He held a clipboard and looked impatient, like he'd rather be anywhere else. "Yes," she called through the door. "Ma'am, I've got official documents for you," he said, voice flat. From Horizon Holdings, she opened the door, just a crack, chain still on. "Horizon who?" "Property management," he said, shuffling papers. "You're behind on your HOA dues. We've sent multiple notices." Mabel blinked. "HOA? I don't belong to no HOA," the man sighed, like this was a familiar script. "Ma'am, you're part of the Eastside Neighborhood Association. It was formed last year. You received letters." "I never got no letters," she said, frowning. "And I've lived here since 1981. Nobody ever said nothing about an HOA." He didn't argue. Just slid a thick envelope through the crack in the door. "This is your final notice. You're $3,850 in arrears. If it's not paid in full within 14 days, we'll proceed with eviction." "Eviction?" Her voice cracked. "You can't evict me from my own house. Technically, ma'am, you're in violation of community covenants. The association owns the rights under New City Zoning Code 7B. You'll need to contact legal if you want to dispute it." He turned to leave. "Wait," she called. But he was already walking back to his white SUV with tinted windows. She watched him drive off, the envelope trembling in her hand. Inside, she sat at her kitchen table and opened it slowly. The paper was full of legal terms she didn't understand. Non-compliance, lien enforcement, summary ejectment. At the bottom was a court date, 2 weeks away. Below that, in bold, failure to appear will result in immediate possession granted to plaintiff. Her chest tightened. She dialed the number at the top of the page. A recorded voice answered, "Thank you for calling Horizon Holdings. Our office hours are Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. She hung up. Heart pounding, she called her church deacon, who suggested the city's tenant rights hotline. She dialed it 3 times that afternoon. Each time she heard the same message, All counselors are currently assisting other callers. Your call is important to us. ... By evening, panic had settled in like a cold fog. She dug through her filing cabinet, told tax returns, insurance papers, property deed. Everything was in order. No mention of any homeowners association. She'd never signed anything like that. Never even heard of it. She called her neighbor Miss Clara across the street. Child, I got the same letter last month, Clara whispered, voice tight. But I paid it quick. I was scared. Didn't know what else to do. Now they say I owe more. Did you join an HOA? No, but they got papers saying I did. Said I signed something when they did that street repaving project. But I never signed nothing. Mabel's stomach dropped. This wasn't just her. The next day she took the bus downtown to the county courthouse. The building was huge, echoing, full of people rushing in suits while others sat on benches, looking lost. She asked at the information desk about her case. The clerk typed her address into the system. Yeah, there's a filing, the woman said, not looking up. Horizon Holdings versus Jenkins, filed last week. You got a hearing in room 214 at 10 a.m. on the 17th. Can you tell me what this HOA is? Mabel asked. The clerk shrugged. Not my job. You'll need a lawyer for that. How much does a lawyer cost? Depends. Most won't take eviction cases for under $1,500 retainer. Mabel's Social Security check was $1,287. This month, she went home feeling smaller than she had in years. That night, she didn't sleep. She sat in her husband's old armchair, staring at the photo of them on their wedding day, both so young. So sure, the world would be fair if you just worked hard enough. The next morning, she called the number again. This time, a real person answered. Horizon Holdings, this is Derek, a man said, brisk and bored. Mr. Derek, this is Mabel Jenkins. I got your notice. But I don't understand. I own this house. Paid it off in '98. I never joined no HOA. How can you evict me from my own home? There was a pause. Then, ma'am, the association was formed by city approval. All properties in the zone are automatically enrolled. Your dues started in January. You've received 3 notices. I never got them. Our record shows certified mail delivery on February 3rd, March 12th, and April 8th. I swear on my life, I never saw them. That's not our problem, he said, voice hardening. The debt is valid. Pay it, or you'll be removed. Removed? You mean thrown out? If you don't vacate voluntarily by the court date, law enforcement will assist. She hung up, tears welling. Thrown out. At her age? From the house where she'd raised her child? Where she'd held her husband's hand as he took his last breath? She spent the next few days trying everything. She wrote a letter to the mayor's office. No reply. She went to a legal aid clinic, but they were booked solid for months. She even walked into a real estate office downtown, asking if this HOA was real. The agent looked at her like she was speaking another language. Honey, said gently, if Horizon Holdings is after you, they've already got the paperwork. They're good at that. But it's not fair, she whispered. He just shook his head. Fair don't pay lawyers. It's back home. She started packing just in case. She wrapped her wedding china in old newspapers, put her photo albums in a waterproof bin, folded her good church dress, and laid it on the bed. She couldn't bear to box up her husband's work boots, still sitting by the back door like he might need them tomorrow. Neighbors stopped by, worried. Some offered to help, but what could they do? They were scared too. One man down the street had already moved out after getting a similar notice. His house now had a for-lease sign with photos of stainless steel appliances and a price of $2,800 a month. On the 10th day, Mabel sat on her porch swing, watching the sunset paint the sky orange and purple. Buttons the cat rubbed against her ankles. She stroked his fur, thinking how strange it was that after all these years, after all the storms and joys and quiet mornings, it could all end because of a piece of paper she never agreed to. She thought about calling her son. They hadn't spoken in years, not since their big fight. He'd joined the army, wanted to see the world, but she'd begged him to stay, to help protect what they had. He said she was living in the past. She said he didn't understand what it meant to hold on to something real. They'd both said things they regretted. And then silence. Years of silence now, with no one else to turn to. She picked up the phone. Dialed his old number from memory. Straight to voicemail. She didn't leave a message. What would she say? Come save me. He had his own life. Probably didn't even remember this house. She put the phone down. Walked back inside. Locked the door. Turned off the lights. But sleep wouldn't come. Outside, the neighborhood was quiet. But change was coming fast and quiet, like fog rolling in. And Mabel Jenkins, who had weathered recessions, illness, and grief, now faced something she couldn't fix with hard work or prayer. A system designed to make people like her disappear, and all it took was a signature she never gave, and a son who hadn't come home in years. Asterisk. Mabel didn't leave a message. She couldn't bring herself to say the words out loud that she was losing the house. She might be out on the street by next week, that she needed help from the one person she'd pushed away. Shame sat heavy in her chest, like a stone she'd been carrying for years. She told herself it was fine. She'd figure something out. She always had. But deep down, she knew time was running out. 3 days before the court date, the phone rang late in the evening. Not the landline, the old cell phone she kept charged, but rarely used, buried in the kitchen junk drawer. She almost didn't answer. But something made her pick it up. Hello? A voice, rough but familiar, said, Ma, it's me. Her breath caught. She hadn't heard that voice in 5 years, not since. The argument that ended with a slammed door and silence stretching longer than any winter. I tried calling your home number, he said. Got a disconnected tone. Mabel's throat tightened. Changed the service, she lied, not ready to explain everything yet. What is it, baby? I was looking at old pictures. Found one of you and Dad on the porch grilling. Remember that 4th of July, when the neighbor's dog stole a whole burger? She laughed softly, tears already forming. That old hound ran off with it like it was gold. Pause. Then, quieter. Are you okay? She almost said yes. Almost gave the usual, I'm fine. Don't you worry. But the weight of it, all the fear, the loneliness, the injustice, broke through. No, she whispered. I'm not okay. And then it all came out. The fake HOA, the fake bills, the eviction notice, the courthouse date, the feeling that the ground beneath her was crumbling, and nobody cared enough to stop it. He listened. Didn't interrupt. Didn't say I told you so. Just listened. When she finished, there was silence for a long moment. Then, I'm coming home. No, she said quickly. You don't need to. I'm already on my way. She tried to protest, but he'd made up his mind. Before she could say another word, he added, Be there tomorrow afternoon. Then he hung up. She sat there for a long time, phone in her hand, heart pounding like it hadn't in years. Part of her was terrified. What if he couldn't fix this? What if he came back only to watch her lose everything? But another part, small but stubborn, dared to hope. The next day, she cleaned the whole house. Not because it was dirty, it wasn't, but because she wanted it to feel like a home again, not a battlefield. She washed the windows, swept the porch, made a pot of collard greens just like he used to love. She even dug out his old room key from the sewing box and unlocked the door for the first time in years. Dust floated in the sunlight. The bed was still made, just as he'd left it. Posters on the wall, sneakers under the bed, a half-finished model car on the desk. She didn't know what kind of man he'd become. The last time she saw him, he was angry, restless, desperate to leave. He'd said this neighborhood was dying. She'd said it was worth saving. Neither of them had backed down. But now, watching the clock tick toward 3 p.m., she realized something. She didn't care who he'd become. She just needed him here. At 3:17, a bus pulled up at the corner. She recognized him before he even stepped off. Same broad shoulders, same way of walking like he owned the sidewalk. But older, tired, there were lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before. He carried a duffel bag slung over one shoulder and walked slow, like his body had been through something. She stood on the porch, hands clasped tight. When he saw her, he stopped for a second. Then he smiled, just a little, and kept walking. He didn't hug her right away. Just stood there, looking at the house like he was remembering every brick. "Still got that crooked gutter?" he said. "You know I can't reach it," she said, voice trembling. That's when he opened his arms, and she stepped into them. He held her like she might break. And for the first time in months, she let herself cry. Inside, over sweet tea and greens. She told him everything again, this time slower, with details. He listened without interrupting, his eyes sharp, focused. When she showed him the eviction papers, he studied them like a soldier reading a map. "This HOA," he said finally. "You never signed anything? Never? And no meetings? No votes? No notices posted in the neighborhood?" "Nope, nothing." He nodded slowly. "This feels off. Real off." That night, while she slept, he stayed up at the kitchen table with her laptop, searching. He typed in Horizon Holdings and East Side Neighborhood Association. What came up wasn't comforting. There were news articles, small ones, buried deep, about elderly homeowners in other cities getting hit with fake HOA fees. One woman in Cleveland lost her house over $400 in late fees she never owed. Another in Baltimore was nearly forced out before a local nonprofit stepped in. He dug deeper. Found public records showing Horizon Holdings had bought up 7 properties on their block in the last 18 months. Sol Cash. All under shell companies with names like Oakview Asset Group and Summit Urban Renewal. None of them were occupied. Just sitting empty, waiting. He called a number he'd saved in his phone from his time working security at a legal aid office during his last leave. A woman answered on the second ring. "Tasha, it's me. I need your help," he explained the situation. She listened, then said, "Sounds like predatory equity displacement. They're using fake HOAs to manufacture debt, then fast-track evictions on seniors who won't fight back. Can we stop it? Maybe. But you've got to act fast. Courts in 2 days? Yeah. Bring all the paperwork. And your mom. We'll meet tomorrow morning. And hey, tell her not to sign anything. Not even if they show up with a sheriff." He hung up and looked out the kitchen window. The streetlights cast long shadows. He remembered riding his bike down this road, playing stickball with the kids on the block, coming home to the smell of cornbread and the sound of his father's laugh. This place wasn't just bricks and wood. It was memory. It was blood the next morning. He drove Mabel to a small office downtown with a faded sign that read Community Housing Justice Project. Inside, the walls were covered in posters about tenants' rights, eviction moratoriums, and emergency hotlines. A woman in her 30s with braids and a no-sense expression met them at the door. "You must be his mom," she said, shaking Mabel's hand gently. "I'm Tasha. Let's see what we're dealing with." For 2 hours, they went over every page. Tasha made copies, took notes, cross-referenced dates. Then she leaned back, eyes narrowed. This HOA was registered 6 months ago by a guy named Darren Wilksa, known front for Horizon Holdings. He's listed as president, but he's never lived here. In fact, he's got a record for fraud in 2 other states. Mabel's hand shook. So it's all fake? Legally, it's shaky, but they filed it with the city, so it looks real on paper. That's how they trap people. By the time you realize it's a scam, you're already in court. But she owns her home outright, the son said. They can't just take it. They don't need to take title, Tasha explained. They file a lien for unpaid dues, then ask the court for possession under breach of covenant. Judges often rubber stamp it if the homeowner doesn't show up with a lawyer, and most don't. Mabel looked at her son. "What do we do?" "We show up," he said firmly. "And we fight." Tasha nodded. "I'll file an emergency motion to delay the hearing. Claim fraud and lack of due process. It won't stop them forever, but it buys us time. In the meantime, start documenting everything. Take photos of the house. Save every bill. And this is important. Don't talk to Horizon again. If they knock, don't open the door. If they call, hang up." On the ride home, Mabel was quiet. Then she said, "You didn't have to come back." He looked at her. "Yeah, I did. You've got your own life. My life don't mean much if I let them take yours." She reached over and squeezed his hand. He didn't pull away. That evening, he walked the block, knocking on doors. Some neighbors were wary at first. Years of being ignored by the system had taught them not to trust outsiders. But when they saw who he was, who his mama was, their faces softened. Miss Clara invited him in, showed him her own stack of letters. Mr. Lee, from across the street, brought over photos of his property line. Gosh, they tried to say my driveway was on their land. Two younger families who'd just moved in said they'd never heard of the HOA either. By nightfall, he had a list of 8 households hit with the same scheme. He typed it all up, printed copies, and gave one to Tasha. Back at the house, Mabel made him a plate of fried chicken and macaroni and cheese. The meal she always made when he came home from school with good grades. He ate like he hadn't had a real meal in weeks. Later, they sat on the porch swing, just like when he was a boy. The night air was warm. Crickets sang. Somewhere down the street, a baby cried, then quieted. You know, he said slowly, I used to think this place was stuck in the past, like it was holding you back. She didn't say anything, just waited. But now I see. It wasn't the past holding you back. It was people trying to erase it. She nodded. This house ain't just mine. It's ours. He looked at her. Really looked, saw the worry lines, the silver in her hair, the strength in her hands that had scrubbed floors and bandaged knees and held his father when he took his last breath. I'm not leaving again, said. She smiled. Good, 'cause Button's already missed you. And for the first time in years, the house didn't feel like it was waiting to be lost. It felt like it was waiting to be defended. 2 days before the court date, with papers in hand and a plan in place, they both knew the fight was just beginning. But now they weren't fighting alone. The morning of the court hearing, the sky was gray and heavy, the kind of day that feels like it's holding its breath. Mabel wore her best dress, the deep purple one, with the lace collar she saved for church anniversaries and funerals. She'd polished her shoes, pinned her hair back neatly, and dabbed on just a touch of perfume, the same jasmine scent she'd worn on her wedding day. She didn't want to look like a victim. She wanted to look like someone who belonged. Her son had stayed up most of the night, going over the papers with Tasha over the phone. They'd filed an emergency motion to delay the case, but the judge hadn't ruled yet. That meant they still had to show up, ready to speak, ready to stand. They walked into the courthouse together, not saying much. The building was loud, babies crying, lawyers barking into phones, clerks calling names over crackling speakers. People shuffled in and out, some with folders, some with plastic bags holding their whole lives. Mabel kept her eyes forward, chin up, but her hand gripped her son's arm like an anchor. In room 214, it was colder than outside. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. A few rows of chairs faced a raised bench where the judge would sit. At a table near the front sat a man in a crisp gray suit, sipping coffee from a paper cup. He glanced up when they entered, then went back to his phone board, like this was just another Tuesday, another file to close. That was him. The one from the white SUV, the one who'd handed her the papers like she was nothing. Mabel's stomach twisted, but she didn't look away. Tasha arrived 10 minutes later, carrying a thick folder and wearing a blazer that looked like it had seen 100 battles. She gave Mabel a quick hug, then turned to her son. Good. You both look steady. That's half the fight. The hearing started late. When the judge finally entered, a tired-looking woman with silver hair and glasses, the room quieted. Fast Horizon's lawyer stood first, smooth, confident. He laid out the story like it was fact. Mabel Jenkins, owner of 1423 Elm Street, had failed to pay dues to the East Side Neighborhood Association, a legally registered entity under city code. He presented signed registration documents, meeting minutes dated but with no attendees listed, and a ledger showing the debt. He asked the court to grant immediate possession to the plaintiff due to ongoing noncompliance and risk to property value. Mabel's hands clenched in her lap. It all sounded so official, so real. Even though she knew it was, Your Honor, she began, voice calm but firm. My clients are not in breach of any valid agreement. The so-called East Side Neighborhood Association was created 6 months ago by an individual with no residency in the area and a documented history of fraudulent property schemes in 2 other states. My client never received notice, never voted to form this association, and was never given a chance to contest it. This isn't a dues dispute. It's a predatory attempt to displace an elderly homeowner through manufactured debt. She handed the judge a packet copies of property records, news clippings, affidavits from 6 neighbors saying they'd never heard of the HOA, and a letter from the city clerk's office stating no official neighborhood vote had ever been held. The judge flipped through the pages slowly. Then she looked at Horizon's lawyer. Did your client obtain written consent from the defendant before enrolling her in this association? The lawyer hesitated. It's an automatic enrollment under the new zoning overlay, Your Honor. Show me the city ordinance that allows automatic enrollment without notice or opt-out. He shuffled through his papers. Couldn't find it. The judge sighed. This smells like a scam. I'm denying the motion for possession. I'm also referring this matter to the city attorney's office for investigation into potential fraud. Case dismissed without prejudice, in case legitimate claims arise later. But for now, Ms. Jenkins stays in her home. Mabel let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. Her son squeezed her shoulder. Outside, the sun had broken through the clouds. Tasha smiled, but it was tired. This isn't over, she warned. They'll circle back. Maybe with a new lie. But today, you won. They didn't celebrate right away. Mabel just stood on the courthouse steps, blinking in the light, feeling the weight lift just a little, but her son wasn't done. That afternoon, he went to the local newspaper, assumed small weekly paper that still printed on actual newsprint. He told the reporter everything. The fake HOA, the pattern across the block, the way Horizon Holdings operated. The reporter, an older man with ink-stained fingers, listened, then said, "We've been hearing whispers about this." But nobody had proof. "I've got proof," he said, "and neighbors willing to talk." 2 days later, the story ran on the front page. Fake HOA used to push out elderly homeowners. Documents show. It included photos of Mabel on her porch, a quote from Miss Clara, and a list of properties Horizon had bought. People started talking. Then came the social media posts. Her son wasn't big on that stuff, but Tasha helped him draft a simple thread. Photos of the fake notices. Screenshots of property records. A short video of Mabel saying, "I just want to live in my home till I'm ready to go." It spread faster than anyone expected. Local activists shared it. A city council member reposted it with the words, "This stops now." Horizon's office started getting calls. Angry ones. Demanding answers. Reporters showed up with cameras. The man in the gray suit, Derek, stopped answering his phone. A week after the hearing, a letter arrived in Mabel's mailbox. Not from Horizon, from their lawyer. It offered a goodwill settlement, $15,000 cash if she'd sign, and in lieu of foreclosure and leave within 30 days. Tasha read it and laughed bitterly. They're scared. They think money will make you disappear quietly. Mabel looked at the number. $15,000. It was more money than she'd held in her hands in years. But she shook her head. "I don't want their money. I want my home. And I want them to stop doing this to other people." Her son nodded. "Then we make it public. We make it loud." With Tasha's help, they organized a small gathering on Mabel's front lawn. Just folding chairs, a cooler of lemonade, and a handmade sign. "This home is not for sale and neither is our block." 10 people came the first night, then 20. Then neighbors brought lawn chairs, kids played tag in the street, someone brought a guitar. A local pastor said a few words. Mabel stood on her porch and spoke simply. "I ain't asking for special treatment, just fairness. If you own your home, nobody should be able to steal it with a lie." Young woman from the housing justice group set up a petition, calling for the city to ban automatic HOA enrollment and require third-party verification for all homeowner debt claims. By the end of the week, it had over 2,000 signatures. Horizon Holdings sent another letter. This time it said the HOA matter has been resolved and that Mabel owed nothing. No apology. No admission of wrongdoing. Just silence wrapped in legal paper. But Mabel knew better. She'd seen the way their lawyer looked in court, nervous, rushed. She'd seen the way Derek avoided her block now, taking side streets when he drove through. More importantly, she saw the change in her son. He wasn't just visiting anymore. He was fixing the porch railing, helping Miss Clara install a security camera, going with Tasha to meetings at City Hall. He'd found something to fight for, and it wasn't just her. One evening, as they sat on the steps watching fireflies blink in the dusk, he said, "I used to think leaving was the only way to survive. Now I see staying and standing is its own kind of courage." Mabel smiled. You're your father's child, after all? I didn't know what Horizon would try next. Maybe another tactic. Maybe nothing. But for now, the house was safe. The block was awake. And the people who'd been told they didn't matter were starting to remember their own power. The fight wasn't over. But for the first time in a long time, it felt like they were winning. Copy as clean. Translate. New. So the story didn't end on the front lawn with lemonade and fireflies. It kept growing quietly at first, like a seed cracking open in the dark. Then faster, until it couldn't be ignored. A few days after the gathering, a city councilwoman showed up at Mabel's door. She wasn't alone. She had a staffer with a notepad and a reporter from the local TV station. The councilwoman apologized for not stepping in sooner. "We've been hearing rumors," she said, "but without proof, we couldn't act. What you've done? It's given us the push we needed." Mabel invited her in. They sat at the kitchen table, the same one where decades of family meals had been shared, where report cards were celebrated and scraped knees were tended to. Now it was a table where justice was being planned. The councilwoman asked questions. How did the notice arrive? What did the papers say? Who else was affected? Mabel answered calmly, but her hands trembled a little. Not from fear this time, from purpose. She wasn't just speaking for herself anymore that evening. Her son came home from a meeting with Tasha and a few other housing advocates. His eyes were tired, but there was fire in them. "They're calling a special hearing," he said, "next Thursday. City Council wants to look into Horizon Holdings and all companies using fake HOAs to push people out." Mabel nodded slowly. "Will they let me speak?" "They're begging you to." The days that followed were a blur of preparation. Tasha helped Mabel write a statement, not too long, not too fancy, just honest words from the heart. Her son practiced with her. Sitting on the porch swing late into the night while crickets sang and the streetlights flickered on one by one. He made her say it out loud until her voice didn't shake. "Tell them what this house means," he said. "Not just the bricks, the memories." So she did. She wrote about planting tomatoes with her husband in the backyard, about rocking her child to sleep in that very kitchen during thunderstorms, about how the creak in the third step on the stairs was the same sound her father-in-law's boots made when he came home from work. She wrote about dignity, about belonging, about how no amount of money could buy what this place held. The morning of the hearing, the city council chamber was packed. Not just with neighborhood folks, but with seniors from other parts of town who'd gotten similar letters. Some held signs, "My home is not a commodity, and respect our elders, not just our real estate." A few brought photo albums, like evidence of lives lived. Mabel wore the same purple dress. Her son walked beside her, not holding her arm this time. She didn't need it, but staying close. Like a quiet shield, inside the room hummed with nervous energy. Council members sat in high-backed chairs behind a long wooden desk. Horizon Holdings had sent a lawyer different from the one in court, wearing an expensive-looking suit and a tight smile. He tried to speak first, calling the whole thing a misunderstanding and an unfortunate paperwork mix-up. "What?" The council chair cut him off. "We're not here to hear corporate apologies. We're here to hear from the people this hurt." One by one, residents stood. A retired teacher talked about getting a $5,000 bill for landscape violations because her azaleas grew too tall. A Vietnam veteran said they told him his American flagpole violated aesthetic codes. Each story was different, But the pattern was the same: confusion, fear, pressure. In a system that seemed rigged from the start. Then it was Mabel's turn. She walked to the microphone slowly, her shoes clicking softly on the tile floor. All eyes turned to her. She took a breath. "I didn't come here to ask for money," she began, voice clear despite its softness. "I came here because I was told I didn't belong in my own home anymore. Not because I couldn't pay, because I never agreed to what they said I owed. They made up rules while I was sleeping. And when I woke up, they were at my door with a lockbox and a sheriff." She paused. The room was so quiet you could hear someone swallow. "I'm 73 years old. I've paid my taxes. I've voted in every election since I was 21. I've helped neighbors raise a child, buried a husband, and yet for a while felt like the city forgot I existed until I started losing the one thing that said, 'You mattered here.'" Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "This house isn't just mine. It's proof that black families built lives here, even when no one made it easy. And if you let companies like Horizon Holdings steal homes with fake papers and fancy words, you're not just taking houses. You're erasing history." She stepped back. No applause, just silence that felt like respect. Then, slowly, people began to stand. One by one, until the whole room was on its feet. The lawyer from Horizon tried to speak again. But the council chair waved him off. "We've heard enough." 2 days later, the city attorney announced a full investigation into Horizon Holdings and 3 other property firms using similar tactics. Within a week, criminal fraud charges were filed. The man who'd posed as HOA president, he'd already fled the state. But the paper trail led straight back to Horizon's owners. The council didn't stop there. They fast-tracked a new rule. From now on, any homeowners association that wanted to collect fees or enforce rules had to prove it was formed by an actual vote of residents. No more secret enrollments. No more automatic liens. And 4 homes owned by people over 70, an independent housing advocate had to review any eviction filing before it could go to court, local news called it. The Jenkins rule. Mabel didn't like that. Named too much attention. She'd say, but she didn't complain either, because she knew it meant other mothers, other grandmothers, wouldn't have to go through what she did. Her son started volunteering with Tasha's group full-time. He helped other seniors fill out forms, showed them how to spot fake notices, even taught a few how to use smartphones to record suspicious visitors. He wasn't the same restless young man who'd left years ago. He'd found his place not by running away, but by coming back. One afternoon, as they sat on the back porch shelling peas, Mabel asked, "You ever think about moving on again?" He looked at her, then at the yard, the tomatoes ripening on the vine, buttons napping in a patch of sun. "Nah," he said. "I think I'm right where I'm supposed to be." She smiled and handed him a pod. "Good, 'cause I ain't done needing you." That evening, the neighborhood held a cookout not as a protest, but as a celebration. Grills fired up, kids played double dutch in the street, old gospel songs floated from someone's speaker. Even Miss Clara danced a little, holding onto her walker like it was a partner. Mabel stood near the edge of her yard, watching. She thought about how close she'd come to losing it all, how silence nearly cost her everything, and how speaking up just once clearly, without shame, had changed the course of more lives than her own. Later, as the sun dipped below the rooftops, her son came over and handed her a paper plate piled high with ribs, cornbread, and collards. "Eat, Mama," he said gently. "You earned it." She took the plate but didn't eat right away. She just looked at her house, her real, honest, standing tall house, and whispered something only she could hear. The streetlights clicked on. Laughter rose and fell like waves. And for the first time in a long time, the future didn't feel like something to fear. It felt like something to protect. The system hadn't been fixed. Not all the way. But a crack had opened. And through it, light-danned people were starting to pour in. Spring came in soft and steady, like a promise kept. The crocuses pushed through the soil where Mabel had scattered seeds last fall. The old oak in the front yard wore a crown of new green leaves. And the house, once quiet, once threatened, buzzed with life again. The repairs had started weeks ago. A local nonprofit, inspired by what happened, launched a Homes for Good program. Volunteers showed up on Saturdays with hammers, paintbrushes, and fresh shingles. They fixed the leaky roof, patched the sagging porch, replaced the warped back door. Mabel tried to pay them, but they just smiled and said, "This is our thank you to you." Her son stayed. Not just for a few weeks, but for good. He'd taken a part-time job with the Housing Justice Group, helping other neighborhoods spot red flags before it was too late. He slept in his old room, again the posters still on the walls, the model car finally finished and sitting on the shelf like a trophy. Some mornings, Mabel would find him out back with a wrench, fixing the fence or tightening loose boards on the garden shed. He moved slower now, less restless, like he'd finally found something worth staying for. Buttons, the cat, still showed up every evening. But now he had a little house of his own nailed to the side, porch painted blue, with a tiny roof. Mabel left out milk, and her son left out dry food. "Gotta keep him loyal," he'd joke. The neighborhood had changed too, not in the way developers had planned, but in the way people do when they decide to protect each other. Miss Clara started a block watch that was less about crime and more about checking in on birthdays, doctor's appointments, who needed a ride to the store. A young couple down the street opened a community tool library out of their garage. Another family turned their empty lot into a shared garden where anyone could plant a row. And every Sunday, rain or shine, folks gathered on Mabel's lawn for what they now called porch talk. No agenda, no speeches, just folding chairs, sweet tea, and conversation that wandered from grandkids to gospel music to the best way to fry okra. Sometimes a neighbor would bring a guitar. Sometimes someone would just sit quietly, listening. It wasn't fancy, but it was theirs. One Sunday in early June, the air smelled like jasmine and charcoal. The block cookout was back, bigger this time. Not a protest, not a rally, just a celebration of still being here. Tables lined the street, covered in foil pans of mac and cheese, smoked ribs, peach cobbler, and strawberry lemonade. Kids ran barefoot through sprinklers. An old man played blues on a harmonica while two teenagers tried to dance. Like their grandparents used to, Mabel sat in her favorite chair on the porch, fanning herself with a church program. She watched her son laugh with Mr. Lee over a plate of cornbread. She saw Miss Clara teaching a little girl how to braid hair. She saw new faces, people who'd moved in recently, but stayed because they felt welcome, not priced out. A woman from the city housing office came by, not in a suit this time, but in jeans and a t-shirt. She brought paperwork, not an eviction notice, but a grant approval. The city had set aside funds to help longtime homeowners with repairs, property taxes, and legal support. Mabel's house was one of the first on the list. "I told them your story," the woman said quietly. "It helped get this passed." Mabel just nodded. "Tell them thank you. But tell them to keep looking out for the ones who don't have a voice yet." Later that evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in oranges and purples, Marvin Gaye's "What's Going On" drifted from someone's speaker. The music was soft, familiar, full of longing and hope. Mabel closed her eyes for a moment, letting it wash over her. Her son came and sat on the step below her. He didn't say anything at first. Just listened to the music, watched the kids chasing fireflies in the twilight. "You ever think," he said after a while, "that maybe this is what legacy really is?" Mabel opened her eyes. "What do you mean?" "Not the house. Not even the deed. But this," he gestured to the street, "the people, the laughter, the way folks look out for each other, the way we remember who we are because someone stayed to tell the story." She looked around, saw the young father helping an elder to a chair, saw teenagers cleaning up trash without being asked, saw neighbors sharing food like it was nothing because to them, it wasn't. It was just what you did. "You know," she said softly, "your daddy used to say a home ain't for walls. It's the love you build inside them and the hands you reach out beyond them." He smiled. Guess he was right. He sat in silence as the music played on. In the weeks that followed, life settled into a new rhythm. Mabel started teaching a small sewing class at the community center, just mending and simple quilting. but the women who came said it gave them peace. Her son began mentoring a teenager who'd gotten in trouble with the law, showing him that there were other paths than the ones the world tried. To hand him the threat of horizon. Holdings never fully disappeared. Other companies tried similar tricks in other parts of the city, but now people knew what to look for. They had a playbook, and they had each other. One rainy afternoon, Mabel found an old photo album in the closet, yellowed pages, plastic sleeves curling at the edges. She and her son sat on the living room floor, flipping through pictures. Birthday parties, church picnics, fishing trips to the lake, her husband grinning with a fish almost as big as him. In one photo, her son was maybe 5, covered in mud, holding a frog like it was treasure. "Remember that day?" he asked, smiling. "I remember you cried when you had to let it go." "Yeah, but you told me some things aren't meant to be kept. They're meant to be set free so they can live." He looked at her. Funny how that comes back around. She didn't answer right away. Just smoothed the photo with her thumb. That night, after he'd gone to bed, Mabel stood in the kitchen window, watching the rain fall in silver sheets. The house felt full not just of things, but of time. Of love that had been tested and held. Of mistakes forgiven. Of silence finally broken. She thought about all the people who'd been pushed out of places like this by redlining, by neglect, by greed, dressed up as progress. She thought about how close she'd come to joining them, but she didn't. And because she didn't, others wouldn't have to either. The next morning, she made pancakes thick, golden, with blueberries from the garden. Her son came to the table sleepy-eyed, hair messy, just like when he was a boy. They ate in comfortable quiet, the kind that only comes after a storm has passed. Later, they walked to the mailbox together. Nothing urgent, just a utility bill paid on time, flyer for the summer block party, and a letter from the city council, thanking her again. She tucked the letter into her apron pocket. "You know," she said, as they turned back toward the house, "I used to think fighting meant yelling or marching. But maybe it's just this showing up. Every day. For your home. For your people." He looked at her, then at the house. Then at the street where kids were already setting up a basketball hoop. "Yeah, Mama," he said. "I think that's the truest fight there is." And as they stepped back inside the screen door creaking, the smell of coffee still in the air, it wasn't just a house. They were returning to it. It was a promise. It kept continued, passed on, out on the porch. Buttons stretched in the morning sun. The garden bloomed. The neighborhood breathed, and no one was going anywhere.